up, gamers? I'm Jason.
I'm Julie.
And today on Dicing Dragons, we have another episode of What's on Our Table. Well, this one should be more like what was previously on our table, as the last game that we got played was the Lord of the Rings adventure book game. So today we're going to be discussing adapting IP to the tabletop. Now, I think this is going to be a fairly interesting discussion. I think a lot of people think, you really have to take that IP, turn it into a board game. But I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. There's some different types of games we've played that maybe adapted only a portion of the IP, so we'll see where this takes us. Anything you want to add at all, Julie?
No, I'm interested to hear your opinion. We have not discussed this, and so it should be interesting.
Yeah, this is a free-form discussion. There are no notes. This is us doing it almost live, except it's not in front of a live studio audience. We'll be doing some editing and putting it on YouTube. Now, to get ready for our discussion, we're going to grab our drink, grab our best friend and fellow host, and now you're going to hear our thoughts about the importance of adapting IP to the tabletop. So we played a lot of IP games. We have some that we haven't played in a while here that I think do a good job of adapting the IP. I brought out Horizon Zero Dawn for a very specific reason, but I want to hear Julie's thoughts first on this and see where this discussion goes.
I mean, we've had conversations before about how IPs basically were just slapped onto games and didn't really translate, and we've
and some are just sort of okay, actually. One good example of that, I think, is Harry Potter Talisman, if you're looking for.
Yeah, well, I was also going to say, there's also the Harry Potter, they're called Rising.
Death Eater's Rising.
Death Eater's Rising, that I find is not really all that themed. I mean, it's a little bit themed. It's a little bit, excuse my language, half-assed.
But you like Death Eater's Rising a lot.
I did, but it's not the best adaptation. I mean, how many different Harry Potter games are there? Like, I mean, if we want to go there.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good example.
There's that one. There's the school one with the crystals. I can never remember what that one's called.
I'm drawing a blank on it as well, but I will have the name flash, or I will have a link to a review of it down below in the video description.
There's the
Talisman, Hogwarts
Battle.
There's the mischievous one, in Diagon Alley, like Mischief in Diagon Alley.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the one that does the best job is the one that we have different opinions of, but I think Hogwarts Battle definitely does it. Like, they got the same number of years. You've got the different everything grow. Like, you get your more and more spells as they learn more. It gets more complicated. It gets more monsters, more villains.
So I agree with you, and I think Hogwarts Battle is the perfect example of an IP being used to its fullest. Like, that is essentially the 7 movies or 8 movies adapted into a tabletop game that fully captures the experience of the films. And I think they did a great job. I think that's very difficult to do in a lot of games. Now, there is a Toy Story version of that game, and I'm very curious to see how that plays. We do have it, but I'm not so sure that we're going to like that system that we enjoy as much with Hogwarts Battle when we play it with Toy Story. Is that going to feel more like the IP has just been slapped on? I'm starting to become more and more of the opinion that it's mechanics first, IP second. And there's different degrees to the level of adaptation. Now, the one thing I want to say about Death Eater's Rising, I don't feel that it's as half-assed as you think. I think that does a very good job of adapting sort of the very end of Harry Potter. And also, I think I have a little bit of a soft spot for that game as well, because it started pushing the Rising games into new directions, because the final battle that you do with Voldemort is incredibly thematic and really captures the essence, and started them doing a lot more interesting things in the Rising series.
I still think it's a good version of the Rising series. I just don't...
It's not the best use of the IP. I can agree with you on that.
And one game that I really like really isn't necessarily all that adapted, and that would be, of all the Legacy series, there's different...
Legendary?
Sorry, Legendary. There's different levels of adaptation. I enjoyed playing the X-Files. it really didn't take. It's really not the X-Files fully, right? Like
No.
they kind of try to wrap that around there.
But I think they did a really good job of adapting the X-Files for the Legendary series. I thought that they were able to do, like the conspiracy, giving some more flexibility. It's not always based on combat, whereas when you look at Marvel Legendary, which was the original, is just purely combat focused. Now that's changed a lot over expansions, but still primarily combat focused. Firefly does a fairly good job of adapting to the system, but I think Legendary is very much the mechanics of the game first, and then finding IPs that they can adapt to it. Now they do it to varying degrees of success, and you don't necessarily get that different of a gameplay experience. Now going from Legendary to Legendary Encounters, you do tend to see a bit more of a difference, and the encounter system has a bit more adaptability, which I like, but your mileage is going to vary depending on how familiar you are with the IP and how much you're enjoying the experience that those games are bringing to you.
Okay,
but
so how...
one thing I want to just mention, because you're going to change topics, but I think that Harry Potter Talisman is kind of a better example of just a slapped-on IP. Now, I like Talisman. Overall, it's an okay game. It's not our favorite. We've had a couple different versions. The version we've kept is the Harry Potter one because it fits very well with the Talisman theme, and that's the version of the game that we decided to keep. But the fact that, kind of Harry, Hermione, and Ron are a little bit in competition, not really working together to beat Voldemort and beat the Death Eaters, is, it's sort of anti the IP, so I think that fits more of a little bit slapped on. But it's also slapped on and, okay, it doesn't feel bad. Really slapped on, I think, was Clue, Dr. Seuss Clue, was this is just painted on there, and it was not good.
Okay, on another note then, Power Rangers.
I think Power Rangers is another example of a great use of the IP with the system, because that game system was designed with Power Rangers in mind from the ground up. And I think Jonathan Ying did a great job of it. The system is flexible enough for the different teams that they all feel unique. Now, it definitely does feel like it's pushing it with some of the teams and some of the abilities to try to keep that uniqueness. But overall, it does it very well. And if you're talking about the core game, what it was attempting to do and how it's worked really for that Mighty Morphin era, I think they got it down. I think that's up there with Hogwarts Battle for me in terms of bringing the IP to the tabletop.
Okay, so then how do you feel about Dune?
So Dune is an interesting one because that one, I think, they did an incredible job with that, because I think there's a lot of different elements that Direwolf Digital has brought together from different games, and I'm not 100% sold on the deck building element in Imperium compared to other games, but it feels like Dune. It really feels like Dune. But I think you lose a little bit of the factions against each other. I like the leaders. They've had to stretch the IP a little bit, branching into some of the stuff from the Brian Herbert stuff, with the Ixians and things like that, to sort of flesh it out. I do think it's done a great job of adapting the IP because the need for spice, the battle between the houses. But I feel like some of the world building around it is not as important. There's the Fremen, the Bene Gesserit Sisterhood, Choam, all that stuff is there. It's present and it's important. But some of the way that those organizations would backstab or have their own agendas going on is completely left out of the game. And I get that. It makes complete sense because it wouldn't fit with the deck building game that they've made. Now, from what I hear, the game by Gale Force 9 that's adapted, that is the reissue of an older game, each of the factions feels more like the actual factions, but what's really not accurate to the setting at all is that, the Tleilaxu can take over Arrakis, or the Bene Gesserit can take over Arrakis, something that actually never happens in the series.
So, better or worse adaptation than Red Rising?
Better or worse?
Dune.
Dune is a much better adaptation than Red Rising, because I like Red Rising as a game, and this is interesting because we're talking about how you adapted the IP and stuff felt slapped on. So, and just what aspects you're adapting. Red Rising is a great adaptation of the world itself to the tabletop. The color system, the way the characters interact and work together, and it gives you a nice snapshot of the Institute and how the different houses at the Institute work. But beyond the book Red Rising itself, it's definitely lacking. Now, it's included some elements, but that comes like epic space battles, conquest, like trying to reform governments to make things more egalitarian. None of that comes across in the Red Rising game. That doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad adaptation, but depending on what you want from Red Rising as a game, you may not get it.
So,
and an example that I think you've wiped from your brain.
Scott Pilgrim?
No. That I think tried too hard. I think that's actually a good one to bring up. I almost forgot about that. It tried too hard to adapt the video game aspect and the button mashing comments of the game. It had too many resources and it just so much stuff going on that the game never really came together. Now, a game that we enjoyed playing, but is no longer a collection, I brought it down because we like this version more, is Cowboy Bebop by Lynn Vander Studios, the Cowboy Bebop board game, which is an incredibly accurate thematic adaptation of the series to the tabletop. It's just not the most engaging cooperative game that we have. And while this one has some semi-cooperative elements, you do have to work together, it doesn't feel right, as there was some rivalry between Spike and Faye in the series. But, Jet, Spike, Ed are always usually working together. They do have some disparate agendas, but there's not really that high level of semi-cooperativeness that is in this game, where you're in more competition. But this was a much more fun experience compared to the original Cowboy Bebop game.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't speak to it because I don't know Cowboy Bebop, so can't really use that.
Yeah, no, but we discussed it. But you just saying you enjoyed this because of the gameplay, and you didn't enjoy the gameplay.
We have
the other
so many IP games. It's really hard to go over them all. I mean, we've talked about G.I. Joe and Transformers. We have some My Little Pony.
Yeah, but G.I. Joe is actually a great example because the deck building game is our favorite of the cooperative deck builders from Renegade Game Studios. It is G.I. Joe to a nutshell. You've seen a little G.I. Joe, and from what you saw with your brother, you're like, this is G.I. Joe.
Yes.
And it's fun, which is even more exciting is that it's fun. I've got friends, like Ryan from Mr. House Gaming, who's played it. He's much more into Transformers. He goes, G.I. Joe's the best. He's like, you told me. I didn't believe you. I played it. It is by far the best. Now, you get the G.I. Joe version of the Power Rangers game using the Guardian system, and while it's fun, it's quite clear that it works well because of the different Joes, different abilities, but there's still something missing. The vehicles aren't as fun as the Zords, so that's where it doesn't fall apart, but you can see where you're trying to fit an IP around a system that wasn't exactly designed for it.
Another fitting an IP around a game, 5 Minute Marvel.
Yes. And that one works surprisingly well. And Marvel is one of the IPs that it's just so broad. There's been so much done with it over the years that you can just adapt it into many forms. And a lot of them are successful. But we had Marvel Consciousness Champions based on a mobile game. And that one wasn't a bit. It went really quickly out of the collection. We didn't even do a review in it. So
I guess, we've talked about all kinds of different examples. I guess to kind of bring it down to the essence, I think, maybe of what we're trying to say.
Yeah, but there's one... I want to talk about this because I haven't mentioned it. And in talking about this, there's another one I wanted to talk about, which was Bloodborne, the board game. So Horizon Zero Dawn is not at all representative necessarily of the video game itself, but it's an incredible job of adapting the world, the hunters, the machinery, and the world feels very much lived in. Some of the expansions do bring in some of the actual conflict that's going on, but nothing really represents the journey of the heroine character on this epic quest adventure that would be much more a dungeon crawl thematic game. But this one we quite enjoyed a lot more than we thought that we would. It was a review copy that we were able to play, and while the game has some limitations, it still adapts stuff very well and was really fun. Semi-cooperative and cooperative, both modes worked well. Now, we're talking about video games. This did a good job of taking a video game and being like, how do we make this a fun tabletop game? Now, this is a dissenting opinion, but a game that we hated and made one of the worst of our year list, which is Bloodborne, the board game, which is a meticulous adaptation of the video game to the tabletop. And there are certain elements like the Hunter's Moon and the reset that drove us absolutely batty, and is one of the biggest criticisms of the game from even those that like it, that the reset and some of those video game elements don't feel good in a tabletop game. Also, the random generation of the maps felt absolutely horrible because we lost some missions because the tiles just didn't come out in the right order. And we were like, my God, we just wasted a couple hours because of these random stack tiles, which is, as parents, we just don't have time for that. So we hated that game. But it is the board game on a tabletop. The video game as a board game, and lots of people love it, but it was a big miss for us. We also have Aliens, which was pretty cool, but it almost felt so much more like Zombicide than Aliens.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think to distill it down to my opinion, and this is where we're going to get to the distinction between, what Jason thinks and what I think. But I think there's twofold to a successful IP translation into a game. Mm-hmm. You can go the Power Rangers and Hogwarts battle, that you really have a game that really feels like you're in the IP, like you're living it. It is a good reflection, and that often starts with creating the board game from scratch, as you said, with Power Rangers. But
having some ideas for mechanics. And then it's like this IP works with the mechanics. It's making that connection.
Yeah, but I think the second successful one to me is when the IP feels, I mean, a little bit to this, it feels like you're in the world and the game just fits without it having to be a whole living all aspects of it. And when the IP and the game don't distract from each other, even if it's not the entire reality, I still think it's a success. And I think maybe, 5 Minute Marvel is a distilled version of that, in the sense that it's fun. It has Marvel on it. It's not Marvel, but it's fun. It's a fun way to use the IP. There are other times it's just an insult to the IP, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've got two incredibly thematic Marvel games, which are, Marvel Champions, and then we have Marvel Zombies. Incredibly thematic, absolutely capture the IPs. And what's also important to note is, Lovecraft, it's a free IP, so the Cthulhu mythos, a lot of people use it. And we love Death May Die. If you're a hardcore Lovecraftian fan, Death May Die almost spits on the IP. Because fighting the monsters is something that you really don't do in Lovecraft. And that's what the game is all about. And it is incredibly fun. It was a great use of the IP. So they took a lot of the elements of it and goes we're going to change this aspect and it's going to be really fun. And they succeed. So that can happen too. But I'm going to largely agree with Julie. I think that the ways to do it is sometimes the IP will fit and you might make some changes and you get a really fun game. And as long as the gameplay is exciting, fun, and engaging, the game is going to succeed, like Death May Die. You can have some solid adaptations that bring you into the world, or maybe aren't the best game, but are still going to be quite enjoyable. We've got these two examples. I say that Space Serenade is actually a little bit higher on the list. And then Julie said you've got those IP games that just connect very well from the ground up. But you can also have games that are designed like that can really disconnect from part of the audience, which is why I feel Bloodborne, the board game, does, because it is for fans of the video game. If you're a board gamer and you love the Bloodborne video games, that's what you're going to get. I really wanted a great tabletop game in the world of Bloodborne, and that is not at all what we got. You had the God of War card game, which was fun.
How about the X-Files game that the one where you're basically trying to solve a mystery? Very thematic.
Very thematic.
It just had some problems with the game.
With the design, there was a couple ways that the one versus many aspect, the one could definitely just run away with stuff if...
Well, and that was a little bit of the reality of the show, except that, Scully and Mulder always found a way.
But it's not fun to be behind the 8 ball. Or, Call to Adventure, Stormlight Archive. Perfect fit. The worst of the Call to Adventure games. But it's such a perfect fit for the IP, but that cooperative element just doesn't work as well as it did later on. Needed more development. So it's very interesting. You can have stuff that should be a smash hit, and then it just doesn't quite come together. So IP games are very, very tricky. And my opinion, just to reiterate and be clear, I think it's mechanics are the core of everything. The game has to be fun above all else. Then it's how is this IP and this game all working together, which can lead you to some truly great gems, which we're grateful for because we love our IPs, we love our IP games, and we're getting a lot of good ones, a lot of great ones, whereas before it used to be like IP game equals garbage, i.e. Wonder Woman 1984. Ooh, that's a stinker.
I've forgotten about that one. And I think basically if I'm hearing you, what we're saying is the game has to be fun whether you like the IP or not, and I think we found some of those where I can say I really don't know the IP, so the IP doesn't add anything to it for me, but I still enjoy the game. I think the IP...
Like Power Rangers.
Yeah, the IP... Well, I know a little bit about Power Rangers, but not enough to appreciate. The IP should give the game that much, bring it to another level. So clearly we needed another level of battery.
Yes. Unfortunately, sorry about that quick fade. We're going to let Julie continue where she left off.
So all I was trying to say is the game should be fun whether you know the IP or not, and then the IP just, if it's known to you, is familiar to you, just brings the game to a whole other level. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We're very much on the same page, and it's going to depend what you're looking for. Red Rising is a great example, I think, of a great world-building use of the IP, but maybe not the best use of the IP for fans of the entire book series. But it got me into the Red Rising series, and I like the books, eagerly waiting for it to finish up, and catch up and go through all of them. So there's some great, nice, cool introductions. I played the game before getting into the world, and the world was quite clear to me what I was getting into from the game itself. So there's lots of ways to use IP. The biggest issue is don't destroy the IP. Don't let the IP be a detriment to you. And if it is, get rid of it.
Not the right
Get
thing.
rid of it. Do your own thing. Like, have something cool. Because IP isn't everything. And sometimes, you're going to be paying a fortune for an IP, and it's not going to give you much at the end of the day.
So on that note, we're going to remind you to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell to be notified when we have new content for you.
And take a look down below in the video description. You'll find links to all of our social media feeds, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you'd like to see some pictures of what Julie and I have been playing in the past, make sure you check out those feeds. Our Instagram feed is a little dry, but we'll be getting some stuff up there again soon. And then popping up in front of us are going to be links to some of our previously released videos. In front of me will be our most recent release, and in front of Julie is going to take you back to... Pick the game.
Red Rising, since you just
all
talked
right,
about it.
so it'll be Red Rising. And on that note, we're now going to...
Grab our drinks.
Grab our best friend. And remind you to... Keep playing games.